Hello everybody, welcome back to the James Lawrence Allcott channel. I hope you're doing very well because it is about to get a little bit spicy today if you're into stats. If you're not into stats, not one for you. Rory, if you've clicked on this, just leave it, mate. Not really one for you because you don't like stats. But for those of you who do like stats, this is one for you guys. It should be quite interesting. What we've done is we've looked into the XG of every Premier League team and we've figured out what it kind of says about them as a club and their season so far. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run through all of the teams in the Premier League and give you a bit of a snippet on what XG is saying about each club. Now, XG is not the be-all and end-all. It's just one ingredient in terms of putting together an opinion on something, but a lot of the times it can be very interesting. Often the big thing when it comes to stats is actually luck. Who's being lucky, who's not being lucky right now, and is that going to continue into the second half of the season? So strap yourself in for some stat nuggets as we figure out what XG is saying about your Premier League team. Before we get into the video, if you're enjoying the content right now, I know a lot of you seem to be liking it, but if you are enjoying it and you're not subscribed to the channel yet, do me a favor, it helps me so much. Click the button, click the notification bell, and click the like as well. Smash it, in fact. Let's get into the video. Kicking off with Arsenal then, and look, it's been a turbulent one for you guys, and XG has reflected that, and I think the thing to remember with the positive results that have started to come is that actually, maybe XG here is kind of on the money. I think in previous years, Arsenal have actually gone well beyond their XG and actually overperformed in terms of the goals that they should be scoring. I think a lot of that's been down to the likes of Aubameyang just being superb with the chances that he's scored. This year, that's dried up. Of course, Aubameyang's not been scoring those goals. The recent change has helped them a little bit, but they are mid-table, and I think they're mid-table for a reason, and I think they will continue to be that. In terms of expected goals against, they are slap bang in the middle. And the same goes for XG in terms of goals scored as well. Look, they should have scored 22 goals. They've actually only scored 20 goals. They should have conceded 20.6 and they've actually only conceded 19. So they've actually been a little bit unlucky down one end and actually been a little bit lucky down the other end. So I think the point to make here with Arsenal is that they are a mid-table team right now, and the peak of the last few weeks, I think it will calm down again a little bit soon, and it will return to the mean. They will have some disappointing games. They'll have some good games where they excite the fans once again, but they are a mid-table team. Aston Villa have been one of the sides of the season. No one's expecting them to jump to the heights that they have so far. And often people can kind of go, oh, well done, plucky little Aston Villa. You're doing very well for yourself. But no, XG says no to that, okay? Because actually, when we look at the numbers, Aston Villa haven't been fortunate in any way. If anything, they've been slightly unlucky. And it's actually down to the other end of the pitch. A lot of people thinking about Grealish, Watkins, those kind of players. It's actually the defence that has led to Aston Villa having the season that they've had so far. In terms of goals against this season, they're looking pretty good. Third in the Premier League at the moment, so they're not conceding many at all. But if we look at expected goals allowed, they're actually in second position in the league so far, which highlights that actually, if anything, they've maybe been a touch unlucky. Of course, they've got a couple of games to play still, but it's the defence that's been so spectacular. Now, a lot of that comes down to the fact that they are attacking a little bit more and they're keeping the ball a lot better, but this defence is really solid. And I guess the attacking players allow them a bit of a platform to then get better numbers when it comes to conceding goals, but they haven't been lucky in terms of not conceding. Generally, teams are taking the chances that they've got against them. Overall, they're quite close to their XG, 27.3 goals expected this season. They've scored 29. But what is interesting is Ollie Watkins. Ollie Watkins, we all have been really impressed with. And of course, he scored a lot of goals in that anomaly game, which actually helps the XG, I think, a little bit of Aston Villa in the overall season. But Ollie Watkins, I think we're all saying that, wow, this guy's prolific. This guy's scoring goals. In fact, his XG is 8.9. So essentially, he should have scored 9 goals this season. Actually, the amount of goals that he has scored is just 6. So he's either being unlucky or he's not taking the good chances that he's got. So for Aston Villa, it's good right now, but it could get even better. Poor Brighton. If you believe in XG, if you like it as a metric, then you're probably not a Brighton fan. Brighton fans will consider themselves very unlucky this season. Now, I have a kind of viewpoint on this that I don't think they move the ball quickly enough. And I think that leads almost to a bit of bad luck, if that makes sense, because it's just taken that little bit slower. So here and there are those moments where teams are able to get back and make a block or whatever it might be, right? But if we look at the numbers this year, Brighton have been really unlucky. Have a look at this. So these are the games so far this season. I'm going to click on XG. So these are the games where they've had the most XG. And of course, they haven't won many games this season. In the bulk of these games, they have a higher XG than their opponent, which means they should win these games, or at least 2/3 of these games. But they're not. Sheffield United drew that game 2.6 to 0.7. Higher in this one, they lost it. Higher in this one, they drew it. Higher in this one, to Southampton. And higher than Liverpool, of course, drew. Higher than Wolves, drew. Beat Newcastle, who's, look, you can see their XG. We'll talk about that in a bit. The trend continues. So many of their games, they have a higher XG than their opponent, and that is hurting them. Now, the attack on the players of Brighton when it comes to this is often the forwards. We need forwards, we need forwards, we need forwards. I'm not sure that's the case. I've always been a big fan of Neil Maupay, and last season his XG was about 11.6 and he scored 10 goals. This season it's 5 goals he scored so far and his XG is about 6.6. So he's scoring kind of 90% of the chances that he should score, if that makes sense. Something needs to change, and I think if you're Graham Potter, actually that thing is just a little bit of luck. I think they need to trust the process a little bit here, because a team that's 17th, and for the weight of data that suggests that XG does have a part to play and does give you a bit of an indication, for them to be, where are they? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th in the Premier League when it comes to XG difference. So overall they should score plus 5.4 goals than they have conceded so far. And at the moment, instead, if you look at their XGA, 18 goals they should have conceded this season, when in fact they've actually conceded 28 goals. They are being very, very unlucky at the moment. With Burnley, we know what we're getting, right? We know the way that Sean Dyche sets out his team, and it's a way that keeps them in the division, and that workmanlike spirit will continue to keep them in the division as long as they can trust exactly what's kept them in the league up until now. Having a look at the amount of goals that they're going to score, they don't really rely on individual brilliance. They concentrate on percentages. They get the ball into the box. They have big men in the box like Chris Wood, and they cause havoc from there. And that's highlighted by the expected goals that they've got so far this season, which is the second lowest in the league. The focus will need to continue to be stopping good chances for the opposition, because as a collective, they do work hard as a team. And if we look at the XGA, which is the expected goals allowed, they're a lot higher in the league. At the moment, they're 13th when it comes to that. So if they can continue to sort of stunt the opposition, they're not going to score a lot of goals this season, but they will concede a lot less than their rivals down the bottom. And that will have to be the way that they continue to work hard. They've always been ready to sort of block, get men behind the ball, and they have a very, very fluent way in defending, because the attitude is always right with a Sean Dyche side. So more of the same when it comes to Burnley, but it's going to be the defence that allows them to survive, certainly not the attack. On to Chelsea, and we're going to have to talk about Timo Werner here, because I think he's a big problem for them at the moment. His XG is 6.6. He should have sort of scored nearly 7 goals this season. He's actually only scored 4. If he'd scored those extra goals, then Chelsea would have the more goals than Man United. They would be just 4 goals away from Liverpool, and they would probably be in much better shape. So a lot of the criticism will come down to Timo Werner. That said, have a look at the amount of chances per 90 minutes that he's had in the last few seasons at Leipzig. 0.52, 0.53, 0.72. He's getting less opportunities at Chelsea at the moment. They haven't figured out how to utilise Timo Werner. He is getting the odd good chance, and I think we've noticed those high-profile misses from him, which will have a high XG. So elsewhere, he's not really getting many chances at the moment. Is that down to the position that he's playing, or the way that Chelsea as a collective are playing, with him as a bit part instead of the main part? I think that's the big problem here. But if you get Timo Werner firing, you get Chelsea firing. With Crystal Palace, I think we've been enjoying the kind of highlight reel clips that we've seen. And I think a lot of people would expect that Crystal Palace are doing all right this season. But actually, in fact, they're not doing that great. They're 14th in the league at the moment. And the numbers are worrying for a team that Roy Hodgson was getting a lot of criticism for the fact that he didn't score enough goals, or not he, but his team didn't score enough goals, that they were super functional, super boring. They've opened that up a little bit with the likes of Eze and Zaha playing through the middle. It's a lot more exciting to watch. But is it more successful? At the moment, it's not. 14th in the league at the moment. And the thing that's really scary for them is the XG, still they're down the bottom half of the table, which is going to be just a bit disappointing when you've brought in the sort of flair that they have. And actually, again, those moments that sort of stick in our minds, you would have thought that you have this sort of feeling that they're kind of an attacking team now. They're not. They're really not in terms of the chances that they're creating at the moment. And the scary thing for them is the expected goals against, which puts them even lower in the bottom 4 for that. Now, a lot of people will be saying, well, hang on a minute, you lost 7-0 to Liverpool, but the XG for that game for Liverpool was 2.2. So Liverpool should have scored 2.2 goals in that game, not 7. So even without that, they would have been in the bottom 5. And so that's an area that they need to sharpen up on, or they need to kind of go back to kind of being a little bit more restricted, or go full force and really, really have a go for it and score more goals. Crystal Palace are at a bit of a crossroads here because they've got a lot of players who are leaving, I think, in the summer. It's an ageing squad as well. And he is trying to sort of evolve it into something a lot more exciting, which is great. But they need to make sure that they stay safe this season and retain some of the steel that they've had in previous seasons. Carlo Ancelotti is working wonders, and XG is here to prove it at both ends of the pitch. Let's start off with the goal scoring. And I think there's one player that really, really springs to mind when you're looking at Everton this season, and it's Dominic Calvert-Lewin, because the amount of goals that they've scored so far, their expected goals for are 21. How many goals have they actually scored? 26. So they're exceeding it by a decent amount. And the big reason for that is Dominic Calvert-Lewin. He scored 11 goals so far this season, and his own XG is 8.3. So he's highly exceeding that. You can look at that two ways. You can suggest that that is luck, or you can suggest that is Dominic Calvert-Lewin being clinical. And if I go back to that one there, in terms of exceeding your XG, goals for XG, the people that he is around at the moment, I think it highlights what a fantastic player that he is turning it out to be. You've got like to Bruno Fernandes, Ward-Prowse, and a lot of that's coming from, of course, his set pieces. Same goes for Kurt Zouma, and then Mohamed Salah and Son Heung-min. Really, in terms of attacking players who are in those areas all the time, it's those two and Fernandes are the only 3 players above Dominic Calvert-Lewin so far this season. The big point to make here is actually at the other end of the pitch. It's really, really interesting for an Everton side that's often been branded a team that frustrates because makes stupid decisions. In terms of the goals against, 20. In terms of the goals scored against, 20. Exactly the same. So I think what that's actually highlighting is something very, very simple. Is yes, they are conceding goals at times, but they're not conceding goals that they shouldn't be conceding, if you know what I mean. So it's not coming from enforced areas, or in particular, Jordan Pickford not saving chances that he should save. So all round for Everton, it's really exciting numbers when you're looking at this stage of the season. Can they keep it going? That's going to come down to not making mistakes and DCL continuing his fine form. Time for one of the big revelations. Are you ready? Are you ready? Here it comes. Fulham. Fulham are all right, you know. Fulham are kind of good. After a really, really shaky start, look at these early fixtures, really struggling, where they weren't on top in terms of XG in any of those games. Since then, the highlighted games here, as you can see, are the games where they've actually had a better XG than their opponent. And so you can see that Scott Parker's really improved this team. He's got the recruitment right, and they're slowly edging their way to a scenario which should see them safe, should I say that? It feels dangerous, but XG is suggesting that they're going to be just fine. Their expected goals for is suggesting they should be 14th in the league. And remember, I've just shown you how bad a start they had. And in terms of goals conceded, it's got them a little bit lower down in 15th. So look, it's nervous times for Fulham, but we knew that from the start. But they are certainly not rock bottom. And actually, if they're able to continue this trend that they've seen in the last month or so, they should be absolutely fine. And that means someone else is going to drop into that relegation zone. Could that team be Leeds? No, I don't think so. Although they are mad, aren't they? They're so crazy to watch, and that is massively highlighted in the XG table. Let's take a look at it, because when it comes to goals against, expected goals against, second bottom in the league, that would worry you. And that is a stat that's been plastered all over the place. And you can understand why that's there. But you have to show both sides of the coin with this, because when it comes to expected goals scored, Bang! They are second in the league, which leads them to being 12th, which is pretty much mid-table. Their XG is 29 and they've scored 30 goals. Their XG is 31. They've conceded 33 goals. So it is much of a muchness, and it will lead to them being absolutely fine as long as they can continue the intensity of both ends of the pitch. I think if you're going to have this tactic, you've got to commit to it, which is what Bielsa does. And I think that's why it's so exciting and enjoyable to watch. And I think you can understand that from those numbers of how important it is that he does commit to that philosophy, because it is working. Otherwise, your XG will be a lot lower. Like I say, look at their goal difference in comparison to other teams. They are slap bang in the middle. So if you have a more negative approach, then you find yourself being a negative team and not winning games that you might have drawn, even if there are going to be games that you would often lose because you're a team that doesn't have the same caliber of player as players in the top 10 of the league. The other thing to point out here is actually the anomaly of Patrick Bamford. Because Patrick Bamford last season, he got destroyed, to be honest, by a lot of people. He had an XG of scoring 34 goals. That's what was expected of him last year. He only scored 16. Now, I think this is where XG falls down a little bit because of the quality of the goalkeepers, but also the sort of the pace of the chances that Leeds are creating. I think the chances become more difficult because of the intensity of which they play. And Patrick Bamford, actually, I think is fantastic because he can keep up with that intensity and still have the composure to score goals at times, as shown by his XG this season. Because if you have a look at what he's done this year, it's phenomenal. His XG is well, it's pretty much top. Him and Jamie Vardy should have scored 11.1 goals this season. How many goals he scored? He scored 10. In a higher league, which highlights that last year was a bit of an anomaly. This year, he's actually grown as a player, and that's something I think we often forget as football fans as well, as players get better as long as they're looking to develop themselves. And he's got the confidence now. He believes he's good enough for this record. He believes he's good enough for this league, and he's proven it. On to Leicester, and I've moved on to squad shooting here now when it comes to each team in the Premier League. And you will see their XG there, which has them 6th at the moment. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th in the Premier League, which isn't so bad. They're quite a clinical team. The problem for them is that the amount of those that are penalties. 8 penalties so far. So when you get a penalty, the expected goals percentage of that is 70%, 0.7. So generally your XG will fly through the roof if you've got a penalty because you're expected to score that. So with Leicester City getting so many penalties, and if you have a look at it, when you take away those penalties from the expected goals, they drop down to mid-table. That's a problem. That's a real problem, especially for a team with the likes of Tielemans and Maddison that we all get excited about, Harvey Barnes as well. They have got good quality there, but up until now, they haven't been delivering it apart from the penalties. Of course, that comes from the quality of someone like Jamie Vardy being that last man, playing on the last line of defence. But I think that if you take it in isolation the first half of the season, you would be a little bit worried about Leicester City. My hunch on Leicester City is that actually in that first 10 games of the season, they had a lot of injuries and were playing sort of high-level counter-attacking football. And with that came a lot of penalties. I believe they've got more quality on the pitch now. Maddison's back. Tielemans is there. Pereira's going to be back soon as well. So with that will come higher quality XG and higher quality XG without penalties at the moment. But if you look at it for what it is right now, then you would be a little concerned about the amount of penalties and if they're going to continue. On to the current Premier League champions, Liverpool, and their XG is pretty special, to be honest, and something that has been a focus of Jurgen Klopp at the start of the season, but something that he's had to slightly kind of abandon. The idea was to really go at teams, and you saw that in the first few games of the season because they've got such quality centre-backs at the time as Van Dijk and Gomez that they felt they could really ramp up the XG, and with that they would score enough of those, especially low XG chances that the likes of Mane and Salah always put away every single season. That's highlighted this season by the game against Crystal Palace. As I said earlier, the expected goals in that game, 2.2. They scored 7 goals in that game. So when it comes to expected goals, 32, like we said, those low XG chances being taken by the likes of Mane and Salah, they've scored 37 goals. It comes to expected goals against and the defence that we're all a little bit concerned with. Is that the crack that could open up for Liverpool a little bit? At the moment, look, there they are. They're not in the top two, which is an area that they normally are. They have been in the last couple of seasons because they've just been so superb at the back in terms of stopping the opportunities for the opposition. They're giving away 19. They've conceded 20 of those. The fact that they've conceded 20 goals when their XG is 19 just highlights that they are conceding the goals that they should. So they're not being unlucky in terms of the goals that they're conceding this season, which should be a concern to Liverpool fans from a broad point of view. But actually, when you see how impressive their XG is going forward, really deep down, Liverpool should be just fine. If you're a Man City fan, have you got real reason to be hopeful for the second half of the season? For two big reasons. The most important reasons, stopping the goals and scoring the goals. At the moment, in terms of goals conceded, of course, they've only played 15 games as opposed to other teams. But in terms of goals against per 90, they're above everyone this season. The big part of that has been playing Rodri and Fernandinho as a double pivot a lot of the time, or Gundogan, always playing 2 6s generally, which has seen a lot more clean sheets. Let's have a look at the clean sheets. There they are with 7 clean sheets so far this season, and just generally conceding not as many goals. Down the other end, the problem for Man City has been trusting a striker. Gabriel Jesus has not been scoring the goals that he should do. And in terms of their expected goals, amazingly, they should have scored 25.7. They've only scored 24. On 2 counts, that's surprising because this is Man City. Man City are never 5th or 6th in the table when it comes to expected goals at the halfway point in the season. This is crazy, right? And the fact that they're not even scoring their sort of low XG chances as well highlights that they, 1, haven't been playing with a number 9, or 2, Gabriel Jesus hasn't been delivering for them either. So the reason you should be excited is for one man's name, really, Sergio Aguero. If Sergio Aguero comes into this side, all of a sudden you've got a team that's XG is going to go through the roof. You could probably still continue to play with the double pivot that they have at the moment. Still look to concede less goals than any other team in the league, but take the chances and maybe create a few more chances as well. Man City are primed and ready to go. The problem for them has been scoring goals, not conceding, and Sergio's on his way. Manchester United's XG really fascinates me, and I think it highlights the individual brilliance of this Man United team and the players that they've got going forward and the problems that they've got at the back. Because at both ends of the pitch, they're so far away from their XG that it highlights that it has to be about the individuals, really. It can be about low XG chances being taken, but I'm just not having it. When you put those 2 and 2 together, especially being Man United, I'm not sure about this. Look at the XG for them. 27.3 goals should have been scored. How many goals have they scored? 33, which is a hell of a lot more. Very, very surprising for them to score that many more. I think that comes down to the brilliance of Bruno Fernandes, Paul Pogba in games against West Ham, Rashford with his brilliance. I think that's a big, big part of it for sure. And down the other end of the pitch, I think it's about individual errors as well. They should have conceded 21.4 goals this season. In fact, they've conceded 24 goals this season, which is a lot, you know. For a team that's going for the title, they should be worried about that. And those individual errors are a problem. Actually, at both ends of the pitch. Like, are you okay relying on individuals? If you are, then that's fine. That might get Man United to the Premier League title, but I feel like they would need a lot of luck to get themselves to that point. It needs to be a more systematic style of play that leads to a higher XG and more kind of comparable numbers between the two, in my opinion, for them to get where they want to be, because it feels like a bit of an anomaly at the moment, which of course happens in football. That's why we love it. But at both ends of the pitch, I feel like there are individual errors there, which are actually slowly getting clamped out. But the reliance on Bruno Fernandes at the moment is far too heavy. And I think what XG says is that they are massively reliant, and it's something they need to be able to shift and change. And that comes down to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer finding a way to do that. Would that hurt the numbers of Bruno Fernandes? Quite possibly. But would it hurt the team more? I don't know. Let me know in the comments below. What do you think about that one? In terms of Steve Bruce and this Newcastle United side, the analytics just highlight what everyone already knows, to be honest. Look at the squad possession. In terms of touches in the midfield third, that means keeping the ball. Okay, that's not the end of the world in terms of, you know, a team that might want to be counter-attacking. You see that with Aston Villa down there, who have excited a lot of teams at the moment. But after that, really, Burnley, Sheffield United, West Brom, Palace, it highlights the teams down the bottom will generally not have control of that midfield area. But then into the attacking third as well, right down there as well for that. For a team that has higher ambitions, for a club that has higher ambitions. I mean, I've gone into this in fine detail, but Newcastle United, I think, are in big trouble in terms of where they want to finish at the end of the season. Because if you don't score goals, then you're relying on not conceding goals. The XG against is 21 at the moment. Look, there's 4 teams worse off than you, and that's the general idea when it comes to Newcastle at the moment. And of course, the chairman who's just trying to protect his asset. In terms of expected goals, it's even lower. It's down in the bottom 3. So if you are going to continue to play this way, I think actually it's the teams that are going to be a little bit more attacking and try and have a little bit more verve in terms of what they're doing, or they need to be even better in terms of defending. Newcastle, very similar to Burnley. It's going to be one of those two for me that goes down, I think, at the end of the season, because neither score too many goals. And I think with Newcastle, there'll be a higher level of pressure if it continues this way. You've got Callum Wilson, who's a fantastic scorer for you. He's done brilliantly for them. But Newcastle United are in trouble because of the style of play. It's not just functional, it's downright negative. And for Newcastle to stay in this league, I'll just be really surprised. But is it their best way of staying in the league? Maybe, with the personnel that they've got. But is it nice to watch? Not really. Poor Sheffield United fans. That second season syndrome, it's really hit Sheffield United. But let's be honest, and I think we've seen this when we watch Sheffield United play. They do hustle, and they aren't that bad, right? And the XG massively shows that in itself. Yes, they are right down there when it comes to expected goals. Let's have a look at it. Expected goals, 15 is obviously terrible, but 3 teams below them. This is a team that's got how many points at the moment? 2. Haven't won a game all season, yet there are 3 teams with the worst XG in terms of goals scored. Their XG for goals scored is 15.8. They've actually scored 8 goals this season, which is so unfortunate. Expected goals against, 25. How many have they conceded? 29. So look, they should be in a relegation scrap, no doubt about that. But the fortunes that they've had in terms of the goals that they could have scored and should have scored, the expected points that they should have got but haven't got, is really cruel. Really cruel. The difference between their XG is 9 less goals than they would have scored. West Brom below them, minus 22, which just highlights that despite them being at the root of the table and only having 2 points and not won a game this year, they're still not the worst team in this league. Another revelation on its way here. Southampton are maybe not as good as we think they are. They're certainly very clinical so far this season. But can they keep that up? I think that's what we'll find out in this second half of the season. Well, obviously we will, James, because they'll play all the games, you idiot. You get what I'm saying. So Southampton 9th in the league at the moment. In terms of their XG, it actually drops right down to 15th in the league because they haven't really been creating that many chances. A lot of teams have created a hell of a lot more. Even the likes of Wolves, West Ham, Brighton, as we spoke about earlier, creating a lot more than Southampton. It's at the other side of it that they've done a lot better defensively, been a lot better. Their expected goals against 18, which is 5th best in the league. So at both ends of it, they're doing quite well. The big thing for me is that they've got to continue to take the chances that they've been given. What's quite impressive here is if you can see What's quite impressive with Southampton this season is the amount of players scoring more than what their XG suggests. That highlights that they're being both clinical. I think it also highlights the importance of James Ward-Prowse. Him and Yannick Vestergaard, you can see there at the top of that, the quality of the set pieces coming from James Ward-Prowse in terms of scoring goal or creating chances for others is huge for Southampton, because otherwise they're not actually creating as many chances as you would have thought when it comes to Southampton this season. So the likes of Danny Ings, Shea Adams and all of those attacking players for Southampton will need to continue to be as clinical, or they need to find themselves becoming a lot more creative. Otherwise, they're going to drop down the table. Next, no, it's not a revelation, this one. It's really obvious. Spurs. Spurs defend and then hope that one of the front two score a goal. Stats. Yeah, I mean, there's not much to say about Spurs, to be honest. Their XG is look, they don't concede many. You can see that. And they look to be hard to beat before they go down the other end of the pitch. Their XG of 22. It has them way down, below the likes of Brighton. It's amazing that, isn't it? For them to be where they are. So you can see that they're not expansive really in any way. But when you've got the likes of Harry Kane in your side, you've got a chance of winning games. And I think we've seen this, more of a stylistic point to make here now, that actually, if you look at a lot of teams now, that player out wide, driving and making those diagonal runs, the likes of Son, and then a player like Harry Kane We've seen it with Shea Adams at times. You've seen it with Firmino for years. I think you're going to continue to see it with a lot of different teams. Man United are starting to play that way a lot of the time with Rashford and his diagonal runs as well. If you can be defensively solid and you've got the quality of those two, you've got a chance. But will it hinder them when it gets to the end of the season? They are hard to break down, but their XG is pretty low. So it could come back to haunt them, which we knew already. Time to get a bit harsh now. And West Brom, there's no way around it, unfortunately. West Brom are the worst team in the Premier League by quite a way. Not a single one of their games has seen them have a higher XG than their opposition. Even in their one victory, which was against Sheffield United, where their XG was 1.72 and Sheffield United's was 3.37. They are by far and away, unfortunately, the worst team in the division. And I did a video on it recently about Sam Allardyce, and I think it's highlighted it now with the start that he's made. And maybe if he gets a good January window, he can change it up a little bit, because it's at both ends of the pitch that they need to sort themselves out. In terms of goals scored, expected goals scored, they've actually scored more than was expected. 9.9. They've scored 11 so far this season, and goals against 32, more than any other team, and that's including a Leeds team that's just above them with 31. But then after that, and let's remember, Leeds play in a very different style to any other team. You've got Sheffield United with 25 expected goals so far this season. And they've actually conceded even more, 39 goals so far this season, due to the mad errors that you've seen in recent weeks with Romain Sawyers and the rest of them. Really, really struggling. They need to get back to that percentage football. Will it be enough to keep them in this division? I think you're really, really pushing at that. The expected goal difference as well, so much lower than any other team by an absolute mile. West Ham fans, most people would think this is boring, but you're going to be really excited by this. You are exactly where you should be. You are 10th in the league, and you deserve to be 10th in the league, and you haven't been lucky, and you haven't been unlucky. You're exactly 10th in the league. David Moyes has done a good, steady job. Scoring goals from set pieces, physical threats in the likes of Souček, good steady players, and then that little bit of flair when you need it as well. In terms of XG, look, you're bang in the middle. You're a little bit lower when it comes to expected goals against, but then you pop back up when it comes to expected goals. They've had a good season, and I think West Ham fans will be looking at it and going, yes, please. A nice, simple stepping stone to becoming a better club, a stable club. And David Moyes deserves huge credit for that. On to Wolves, and Nuno Espirito Santo has done brilliantly with this squad and built it brilliantly, and the recruitment's been very, very good. And the style of play has generally been gently conservative but clinical just as much. And that is the big problem for Wolves moving forward. They're going to have to continue to evolve and change, and the XG that I'll show you in a second is probably not reflective of the Wolves that needs to come in the next few months, and I would expect Espirito Santo to highlight that himself, and it'll be interesting to see how they tweak and change, because not having Raul Jimenez in your team is a massive problem. The XG, generally, they consider themselves to be so clinical, is that if they don't concede goals, they'll get themselves a goal down the other end with a bit of individual brilliance, and you can see that 13th in the table at the moment. Their XG is exactly the same, and so they are where they should be at the moment. But the expectations of the Wolves, I think it was understandable that there might be a little bit of a drop-off this season. It goes up in terms of the defensive side. They've always been defensively very, very strong, Wolves. And you've seen with Romain Sawyers is actually the set pieces might come into play even more as the season progresses, because they're going to need to find goals a different way. Because at the moment, in Fabio Silva, I don't feel like they have that real target man that they had last season with Raul Jimenez. Look at Raul Jimenez's numbers. He scored 17 goals. His XG was 14.7. So he scored a lot more than was expected of him. Fabio Silva, so young, it's a lot to put on his shoulders, and so you're going to have to find a different way of playing in the second half of the season with the likes of Neto and Podence. You've got the quality there to go and do it, but Wolves might be a team that needs to strengthen in January, get themselves a striker, a target man that they can allow themselves to go and play the way that they did before, because at the moment, with the way the XG is, they're not going to score enough goals, and it's just going to peter out into a disappointing season for them if they're not careful. So there you have it, guys. We've had a look at every single Premier League team and seen what XG suggests about it. Of course, these are all just numbers. We are humans, not numbers. Let's always remember that. If you've enjoyed this video, if you are in fact a human with a beating heart, then do a couple of things for me. Hit the subscribe button and hit the like button. If you want more kinds of videos like this, give me some ideas. Let me know in the comments below, or you can follow me on Instagram or Twitter Twitter, and you can message me that way as well. Make sure you get in touch, get involved in the comments, and I'll see you next time.